Hello, everyone. It is me, Omar Bennett, with my professional practice demonstration. My demonstration will be on the accessibility in Wisconsin housing. This issue that I'm going over, which is, including functioning elevators, and accessible housing for those who are handicapped. That all apartments housing should be required to have elevators and or an accessibility um, solution within their building. Um, so this really matters because accessibility isn't an option. Many people depend on these elevators, such as senior citizens, obviously, disabled residents, parents with small kids and strollers, and a lot of people who are recovering from medical conditions, even if that's long term or temporary. It's very important. In Wisconsin alone, accessibility standards vary by building age, the funding sources that we have, and the local enforcement within the community. And many of these multi-story buildings still lack the required elevator access or fail to maintain it. If that means like putting it in or whenever it breaks it down. So these are some of our really main concerns. There are barriers like the people with disabilities, elderly residents, individuals with temporary injuries. Many of these apartments don't have the elevators or any type of handicap accessibility. And then that lack of accessibility affects safety, mobility, and equal housing rights. And this is a lot of the concerns that I will go over, especially what we need to do and address with them. So especially when an elevator fails, or does not exist, people become trapped within their homes. This could lead to missing work or medical appointments and these basic daily needs like having to go pick up your kids from school, or if you have a service animal or any type of animal at all, especially one that needs to go outside, not being able to keep them outside at all, and not being able to do these life things, it really traps you in your home, and it's not fun. It can get very isolating and depressing, and it's not something anybody wants to go through. And when it comes to certain buildings and regulations, the Wisconsin itself follows the federal rules, such as ADA and the Fair Housing Act, as it should, but these were only required and covered for certain buildings. So older buildings built before the 90s are often exempt from having the need for elevators and accessibility. And so this creates like this major gap that we need to fill somehow. And these multi-story gaps. So, these buildings under 4 stories may not require elevators, and which really sucks for people. So, because, like I said, buildings before 1991 often have no accessibility mandates unless they are renovated. So, say something like one of the rooms needs to be done or the foundation needs to be done, unless that is renovated past the year 91, they do not have any laws around it that they have to have some sort of accessibility within the building. And then there's also the barrier, with the maintenance problems. So even when elevators are required, there are many times when the landlords delay the repairs, and leaving the residents even without this without any handicap or disabilities or anything. They leave these residents stranded. And because of this, there is no strong enforcement mechanism to keeping this problem on a lower side. Like, there's no solution to this problem, especially because a lot of landlords just don't fix it, or they have it fixed for a day when they need it fixed. And that's a huge problem for honestly anyone within the communities. So this is like something very dear to me. So my friend recently was in a boating accident over the summer, and she had to have her leg amputated below the knee. Thank God. Even if it was above the knee, that would have made it even worse. So she does not live on a fourth floor. So she does not live on the fourth floor above. But her apartment does not have any elevators. Her apartment is a multi-story, just a 2-story. She lives, unfortunately, on the top floor, and what she has to do is crawl down her stairs whenever she has to leave her house, because when you go after having your leg amputated, you don't, right when you get out of the hospital, you do not get a leg, you do not get any prosthetics. You have to wait until all the swelling and all the wounds are gone. Plus, there are so many delays in getting them, and they're so expensive, and you have to go through insurance. So this apartment became basically inaccessible to her. And they had looked about moving to a downstairs apartment. There were none available. So she left the hospital with a walker and a wheelchair. She keeps the wheelchair within her car. But what she has to do, she has to get the support from her family and her boyfriend and her friends to sit down on the ground, have them take her walker away from her and take it down the stairs, have it sitting there, and she has to basically crawl down the stairs just to be able to get to her car, just to be able to go live a life. And when these places don't have that accessibility and don't have those elevators and that mandatory, requirements and everything's down, like, this really isolates her. Because there are times when she will not go out of her house unless there is someone else in her apartment with her. If she is alone, like, because obviously her boyfriend works and she's not always gonna have someone there, it isolates her and confines her to her apartment where she can move around in, and she is unable to do anything about it. So this accessibility really is not, a luxury. It's not supposed to be a luxury. It's not supposed to be a privilege. It is a human right, and it is tied to the dignity and to the independence of the individual, and it also is tied to the equal access to housing. And with my friend as well, they also had to look at new houses that they could move to. They had to search for accessibility and all these things. They still haven't found anything, so she's still confined to an apartment where she cannot move freely around, where she cannot go push a button and get taken down the stairs. Unfortunately. And so with all that being said, we really have to look at, the current standards, why they fall short, and what these residents need. They really need, these elevators, these ramps, these widened doors, reliable maintenance on these elevators and accessibility options, and there needs to be an emergency plan put in place for when they can get out, especially when a building or an apartment catches on fire and there is no accessibility. My friend isn't going to want to crawl down the stairs, and you don't know how long the fire department is gonna take. And currently I believe there's renovations going on outside of the building, so not in the building itself, but outside the building where they are renovating all of the deck space right now. So they have their sliding doors that go outside onto their deck, completely boarded off. Like, there is no plan put in place, and that's really what we need, is to put these plans in place and have what these residents need. One of the things that we really lack and do not have right now is a consistent state level, especially for Wisconsin, requirement that, all these multi-story apartments need to have elevators, and that we don't have timelines to fix these broken ones. There's a lot of wiggle room, and that is not okay, especially when it comes to the safety and liability of others. So really my main goal is to propose like these updated statewide within Wisconsin and even maybe all other states, these standards that we need, these clear standards, ensuring accessibility, in every multi-story residential building. It needs to be clear standards, no wiggle room, no nothing. And that will really help out within all the communities and with all of the disabled people. And even those who are temporary disabled, moms, anyone really. So one of my proposed change is to require functional elevators in all buildings of 2 or more stories for sure, or some accessibility way to get up the stairs, regardless of age. Regardless of the age of the building, even if that means we have to put a little bit more money into updating the buildings, especially when it comes to electricity, plumbing, and all of that. Regardless of the building's age, it needs to have a functional elevator. And there should be no loopholes. We need to tie all loose ends and everything for it. And with that being said, creating these deadlines for the repairs to happen. So, as an example, a 48-hour time slot for these repair windows, especially heavily when residents rely on them. Especially when I think about it, I was on a trip to a college, and half of the elevators in the dorms that I was staying in were broken and out of use. Now you have 100 girls staying within one dorm building with only one elevator, and they are constantly in use. So, definitely having that 48 mandatory window to just repair them and make sure they are able to be relied on. But there's a really hard time when you don't know who to call, when landlords have been so out of it they don't know what to do. So another proposed change to add to that would be to have a statewide, reporting system for elevator outages. And this statewide like maintenance inspections, so that we can have someone there within that time from all over the state. Like, say your local business is out of town and someone from the next county is able to do it, so they can get that notification. But also, bringing in penalties and consequences for the landlords who decide to ignore this and not use it, and getting our local enforcement, law enforcement for sure, involved when it's not getting helped, and when these people who rely on these accessibilities aren't in the correct hands. And I think that's something we really need to work on as a community for sure. A lot of the benefits that go with this, are the increased safety for these individuals, the independence, so you're not having to call the landlord and like, hey, I need help, or hey, can you come to my house and help me out? I know you have a life, but I need help, It gives them this independence without having to heavily rely on different support systems. But this also reduces the landlord liability in certain situations. So even if landlords are failing and neglecting this, they have a less liability when we put these actions in place. And this also can have a lot more money come in and a lot more tenants that are willing to live in this area because it has a lot more inclusive housing. And that's something that we really would like, is this inclusive housing for everyone without them having to worry about how am I going to live? How am I going to leave this house when I need to? And especially like this accessible housing increases the property value, attracts these long-term tenants that are going to be loyal and stay there forever and give you their money forever. And it reduces the emergency response costs. So say my friend had fallen and no one else was home, someone wasn't picking up, and she was hurt. She would have to somehow be able to call an emergency vehicle to help get her up, take her to the hospital, and have all of this happen. So it really reduces that. And she doesn't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to fall down these stairs today and I'm going to hurt myself. Because I believe that's probably a thought that she has frequently. Because her stairs are narrow. They're not nice luxury stairs. No, they're apartment stairs. And she does not want to have a hospital bill every other week. So there's a lot of accessibility supporting that this happens within a lot of communities, especially in larger towns where there is such a diverse population and such a diverse disability rate. And this supports the aging populations as well. And it keeps people living independently, which can also help reduce nursing home admissions, which is something that not everyone wants to do. They don't want to put their parent or their grandparent or really their loved one into a nursing home when they can have all these accessible features outside of this home, and they can live independently and they can go check in on them frequently without having to be consistently worried about them. So to really go over my proposals again, is to want you guys to review and update these Wisconsin accessibility codes. Establish this elevator standards for multi-story housing. Creating these funding for these older retrofitting buildings, adding this clear enforcement and, expectations, and implementing resident assessment programs to assess this and help certain individuals, as well as, obviously with the clear enforcement and expectations, having those penalties, having the funding going on, the annual inspections, and such for everything. And why my committee support really matters is, and why I want your support is, without legal reinforcement, vulnerable residents will have to fight these issues alone. And not everything is going to go up to the state when one or two people speak out. That's just not how it works. That's not how we are able to do things. And going with a community and not alone, that really, really helps, especially when accessibility shouldn't depend on the zip code you're in, shouldn't depend on the state you're in, shouldn't depend on the landlord or the building age. So really, my call to action and for my request for help from you is to let's, let's make Wisconsin a state where every resident can safely enter, exit, and live in their home every single day while also independently living and living their life. So really, in the end, thank you all for listening. I really hope this touched some people's hearts. I know it really did when I was reading it. And thank you. I'm open to questions and everything.